Welcome to the Rodeo Time podcast. We've got in the house Mr. Andrew Sullivan, or Sully, as they called him in the military. We've got a Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 6, DevGrew. He also started a nonprofit called Community First Project, and I'll let him explain how that helps your community if you call on Andrew. Let's hear from this Navy SEAL's incredible story. Crack a ranch fuel, old son, and buckle up. Go to rodeotime.com for all your apparel needs. Otherwise, you ain't no cowboy. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Rodeo Time podcast. Have in the house Mr. Andrew Sullivan, SEAL Team 6, DevGrew, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes. Yeah.
And, man, we're just now meeting. We just shook hands for the first time. I've been following you on Instagram for a while.
I appreciate you.
And it looks like you've got a nonprofit we're going to talk about. Yep. And well, let's start with that. Tell me about your efforts there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. I think we connected last year after I did Rob's podcast.
Yes, sir.
And then you just had Rob on as well. So
yeah,
we go way back. But I retired from the SEAL teams, and I still had that desire to serve. And I started a company to train law enforcement. So it was a for-profit company. And I realized pretty quickly that the only people that were calling me were the DOD, so military, and then federal agents, and the people I wanted to train, which was police. They couldn't afford it. So that led to the creation of my Community First Project, which is my nonprofit. So what we do is we take SEALs, guys like me who finished a career in the military, and we provide no-cost training to law enforcement to better react to critical incidents. So anything from active shooters to an act of terror, or any situation where they need to use their firearm and are elevated stress levels and have to make a life-death decision.
So you rely solely on just donors then?
We do, yeah. So we fundraise. We get money from a couple states. We get money mostly from private donors. Eventually, we're going to be attacking the federal grant market, which will allow us to be more national. Right now, we're in about 10 states. We've got departments from over 25 states now reaching out to us, but we don't have the money to be able to train on them. So we do rely heavily on private donors, fundraisers, things like that.
I imagine this administration change isn't going to hurt your cause.
Man, you'd be surprised. We get a lot of support from both sides of the aisle.
Really?
Yeah, it's safety, right? It's community safety. Everybody who has a kid in a school should want this training. But
I was thinking the defund the police movement, though.
Yeah, but
or did that not affect you guys as much?
It actually, I don't want to say it helped, but it brought more awareness to the shortfalls in law enforcement, which, the reasons they require us is because they're not getting the funding to be able to train the way they need to. Even without the defund movement, they weren't. And it's kind of shocking when some people find out how little a police officer is trained. And they carry a gun every day.
Yeah.
Outside of SWAT, right? SWAT's the only one getting any kind of tactical training. But these active shooters, it's not a SWAT team responding. It's a beat cop. It's whoever's closest to the situation. And typically that's the person with the least amount of experience.
Yeah.
So it's kind of scary. As a parent, I have two kids, 15 and 12. And every time they leave the house, I'm worried. Like, what happens? Who's responding? It can't be me. It's not a Navy SEAL coming.
Well, it's also disheartening because you got people that, they go through this, whatever academy. And some people get a lot of training, but some cops, is just, like you said, very little training.
Yeah.
And they're carrying a firearm, and they're allowed to just because they have this badge. And then you've got a lot of just everyday citizens that are better trained, and definitely pretty much anybody retiring from the military that are better trained, where it's like, what gives... why should he be able to defend himself with just this little BS training when all these other people who have more training?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and you see that even teachers. There's teachers out there with prior experience or are avid firearms users that could be better prepared to respond in a school shooting, right? Mm-hmm. And they're already in the school, right? So you're asking an officer with little training to enter a life or death situation when you have a teacher that doesn't have a choice because they're already there, but they're not allowed to carry a gun in school in most places.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying it's a conversation we need to be having.
Guns in schools?
Or just guns in general.
I'll do it for you.
Yeah, I know you will.
Yeah,
a lot of people will. But a lot of people will be on the other side saying no, right? So
yeah. Well, the schools here, in Texas, and I know in this little town, we got guns. The staff is armed, and there'll be a sign, as you walk in, and I love it.
It's great. And I think the general population have this idea that law enforcement has this advanced training to be able to do these things, and they don't. You see it in Hollywood all the time. You see these movies about cops, and they make cops look like, they're Rambo. And realistically, they're not. Maybe they shoot 12 hours a year at most, and that's it. So,
well, I remember seeing a clip of Tucker Carlson talking to, I don't know what politician, I can't remember. I can picture his face, but he was talking. Tucker was basically asking, like, what makes you so important that you can have a gun that protects you, but we can't? Or more importantly, children. Like, I don't know. Kids are so precious, and golly, why wouldn't we just arm somebody to the teeth to protect that door?
We protect everything that's important to us in this society.
Correct.
But
banks.
Our kids.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like they got banks with security, and I don't know why. Anyway,
it's scary.
We're getting down into it. But essentially, your nonprofit is, man, that's a good cause. It's something that, and you're right. Both sides of the aisle should be interested in helping that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an everybody problem.
Yeah,
as long as these active shooters, these acts of terror, as long as these things are happening, we need to make sure that law enforcement is able to respond.
Much like in high school, I was pretty tempted to go to the military myself, and the rodeo trail just kind of pulled me away from it, and my having grown up in that lifestyle, regardless, just like any red-blooded American, and especially male that was of fighting age around that time, 9/11, meaning kind of got a first row look at 20 years of global war on terrorism, and have a lot of respect for all of you guys that were over there and everything that happened, and everything that we don't even know happened. But as the war came to an end, I've always thought, man, what just a wealth of knowledge some of these guys have coming back, and each one of them has their own issues that they're having to deal with because of it. Regardless, they've all got just the best experience that anybody could have when it comes to combat. And I don't know, I get so excited whenever I see guys like yourself that are using that to what do they call, what does DJ Shipley call, knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's exciting, because if you're in SEAL Team 6, or which we can talk about in a second, but I just can't imagine the things you've seen. And when you're able to come visit with these police officers, who hopefully they never see that, but some of them might, and to help get them prepared, that's encouraging to me, that everything you went through is it's not I don't want to use the word wasted, because it wasn't wasted regardless.
Yeah,
but
no, I know what you mean.
You've retired.
Yeah.
And now you're still able to benefit from it, or someone is.
Absolutely right. Like, we have 2 decades of going out to combat on a nightly basis, and using and learning and refining these skills, and then it's done.
Yeah.
And the desire to serve isn't gone. The desire to pass on that knowledge isn't gone. It's okay. Well, where do we put it?
Do you know how many missions you went on, you think?
I don't have the slightest idea.
Yeah.
A lot. I had 12 deployments over 18 years. So a lot.
Yeah.
And we're at a tier 1 command where hostage rescue is our primary mission set. So we train a lot different than anybody else. And then the operations we're doing are a lot different than anybody else too, which makes us uniquely qualified to be able to teach active shooter, right? Because hostage rescue and active shooter, it's what it is. Fundamentally, it is the same response. And, we say all the time, hope isn't a strategy. Well, law enforcement is hoping for a long time that it doesn't happen in their backyard, because then they're not prepared for it. So let's take that out of the vocabulary and get them ready. And then, if it happens, they're ready. But if it doesn't, then great. All right. They have another skill that they don't need to use, but at least we're safer for it. So I have no problem getting guys like me who are coming out and retiring or getting out of the service and still want to serve, coming in and paying them to go teach this. And it's great. It's just another pillar of what I do in the nonprofit, which is I provide employment for guys getting out of the military that may not have a direction to where they want to go next, or need a year of some income to be able to figure out what it is, their next career path, and they're giving back and they feel good about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's
that's
great,
neat.
man.
It's like I said, it's so encouraging to me just because you hate to see. I guess one of the things, especially as tensions rise with World War III or anything heats up, right when Ukraine started popping off like 3.5 years ago, it's like I've just always thought if anything were gonna happen big in the duration of my life, I feel like there's no better time than now if you had to pick a time, because there's so many of you guys that are knowledgeable on fighting that are still able to contribute.
And that's dwindling. It doesn't take long for that knowledge set to be gone.
Yeah.
And then, God, it's been several years since we've been seeing sustained combat missions overseas. And golly, I'm trying to think, there's not a lot of people left at the command that I taught that haven't already moved on. And with them goes the knowledge, right? So you're going to have people in those positions if something else happens that haven't seen combat. And that's how it was when I came through, because I got taught by some of the instructors I had were Vietnam era.
Right.
And we were learning Vietnam era tactics right after 9/11 to take over to Iraq and Afghanistan, which those tactics don't work there, right? So you're learning on the fly. And unfortunately, that's probably what we're going to see again if there's another, or when there's another conflict, because we're pulling Afghan, Iraqi tactics and trying to use them in first world countries. So that's not going to fly. It's not going to work.
Before we get too far away from this, I don't want to forget this question, because I've heard, I think you might be the fourth SEAL I've had on here, and numerous other, retired veterans. But what are some of those tactics that came out of maybe the Vietnam guys that you guys used that didn't work? Like, what's some? Do you have anything specific you can think of?
Well, without delving too much into specifics, I think the biggest advantage we had now, vice then, is the technology, and we were pushing off the technological advantages like night vision, and using tactics like shooting up flares to backlight our enemy. When, hey, why would we do that? That doesn't make sense tactically when we have this advantage of having night vision and having overhead assets looking down and giving like real-time battlefield situational awareness. And it took a while for us to actually implement that right off the bat. Body armor, weapon systems, optics, all these things that it took us too long to implement those, pretty significant tactical advantages, because we had this mindset of, all right, we're going to fight in Vietnam and in the jungle, and this is how we did it back then, so we're going to do it the same way. Yeah. And unfortunately, usually those lessons you learn in blood, and we lose guys, or we get fucked up, and then we come back, well, what did we do wrong? Why didn't you try this? Why didn't you use this? Well, yeah, that makes sense, but why didn't we figure that out ahead of time?
Yeah. Well, let's start. I'd like to circle back and start kind of at the beginning of your journey. 18 years total in the military.
Yep.
So, what year was that? How old were you? You started
24. I was 9/11. I remember where I was doing, and 9/11. That was it for me. I had always thought about being in the military, the SEALs specifically, but it's tough, especially early 20s to walk away from your life, and it's a lot of uncertainty. Well, what if I get hurt in buds? What if I don't make it through? Then I'm on a boat in the Navy, and that's definitely not where I want to be. But 9/11 was that catalyst. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, figuratively, right? And the next day I was looking for a recruiter. I'm like, all right, get me out of here. I got to do something. I have to give back. I have to protect my family and my friends, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Where were you, and where'd you live? And
I lived, at that point, I was in the D.C. area, so right outside in Maryland, and I was working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. This is my first job after college, and I remember coming into work, and I'm watching it on TV, and I'm watching people just go about their lives and completely ignoring, the buildings falling down because they had to get to work and they had to go do their job. I'm thinking, man, the world is changing in front of your face, and you can't even stop to watch what's going on. And for me, I knew I had a higher calling. I knew I had to do something different. And That was it. So 01, 9/11, 9/12, 01, I was looking for a recruiter and got me out of there in early in 02 and went to boot camp, went to A school, went to Buds. And then.
So you had a SEAL contract?
I had a SEAL contract. That's all I wanted to do was be a SEAL. And if I didn't, well, I guess I would have wrote it out. But I made it through first time and ended up at SEAL Team 2 and checked in as they were coming off a deployment, which is frustrating because I just spent a year and a half, almost 2 years going through all this training and selection. Now the team that I get sent to is coming off deployment, which means I have another 18 months of workup before I actually get to deploy.
Dang.
Yeah. So it was frustrating because, I went with DJ Shipley was in my Buds class, all those guys that you kind of see out now. Everybody went to Team 10, which was the Red Wings team. And you could see based on who made it through Buds, it was done alphabetically. And me and one other guy were the last two guys in the alphabet. And we went to Team 2. All our friends went to another team and they all deployed almost right when they checked in.
Dang.
So it was so frustrating, man. And we're just like, why? Just get me out the door. It actually worked out for me because I got a lot of more advanced training, a lot more skills that those guys had to wait a while to get, which got me on more operations when we finally did deploy. But yeah, it was a long road, man.
So, man, you just had to sit there
and I checked in and I painted walls for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
As a new guy. It's like, hey, there's your paintbrush and your bucket. Start painting walls. I'm like, no, I'm a Navy SEAL, man. And they're like, yeah, go paint those walls.
Right.
Like, okay, humbling, but it's good.
Yeah.
I learn a lot.
At that point, you'd wanted to be a SEAL for a while. So what at that point was different than you anticipated aside from the painting walls?
It was exactly what I anticipated as far as getting into that community, getting into a team, and I knew I was going to be the new guy. I knew I was going to be taking out trash and do it. That's to be expected. And if you don't expect that, then you're probably in the wrong career field. But the only thing that I didn't like is when we got overseas was the amount of work we were doing and the type of work we were doing wasn't what I expected at all.
What do you mean?
It was it's very cyclical, specifically in Iraq. So my first 2 deployments were Iraq, and we're in Baghdad and then Ramadi and Fallujah. And you hear about all these battles that are going on, but the time of year we were there was just nothing. And my first deployment, we were doing personal security for the top 5 Iraqi. So president, 2 vice presidents, prime minister, former prime minister. We were just making sure they didn't get schwacked. Dang. So yeah, it was probably the worst job you could do, especially as a new guy thinking you're going to go in there and be in these firefights and doing the job that you thought you were going to do and the reason you joined. And then you get there and it's like, all right, protect these people, these Iraqis.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's an important job, but it wasn't a fun one. And it ended up being about a 7-month deployment. I didn't shoot my gun one time, my first deployment, not once.
Wow.
Yeah. I was on one op where we actually had gunfire. And we were finding work. When we weren't doing that, we were finding work. We got a week off because they're out of country. Let's try and find a mission. And we're scrounging. And they did a great job of finding us some stuff. But, by that time where we were, there just wasn't enough to do. Mm-hmm. And then we leave and then, Battle of Fallujah and Ramadi is going on. And then we go back and now we're in Fallujah and Ramadi and again, crickets next time. So I almost got out. I was so frustrated. Tossing around the idea of really the only people working at that time were our Army counterparts, Tier 1 group. And maybe I'll go there. Maybe I'll do an inter-service transfer and go over to the Army. And, thankfully I got talked out of that. But I came off of that second Iraqi deployment completely over it.
Yeah.
And then it was, well, do you want to screen for Dev Group? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm married at the time, young kids, and my wife at the time wanted me out. She's like, all right, you're gone all the time. It's scary. Obviously we're losing friends every deployment. And it was, for me, I had a lot of unfinished business. And I joined to do something that I hadn't got to do yet, which is go over and fight the fight and take it to the enemy. And, we were doing work, but we just weren't doing the work that we wanted to be doing. And so I knew if I didn't screen for Dam Neck and at least try to go there, that I would regret it. Mm-hmm. And so I made that decision.
What'd you call it?
Dam Neck Development Group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Dam Neck was
Same thing. Yeah. We try not to use the real name most of the time, but, if you say Dev Group, everybody knows what we're talking about. But, so I screened, and that was 07 when I screened. I came off that deployment in 08 and went right to selection for Dev Group. And that was another 8 months. And God, usually, and I don't know how much of that, how that works. You have to go to a team first, and then you screen, you get picked up, and you go through another selection course, and it's about a 60 to 65% attrition rate.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost, of the guys that started in the course, almost 65% of our class. And then I checked into my squadron and deployed right away.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was what I was looking for.
Like 8 months?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a long one. It's almost the whole year. And, you're checking your team, but you still have to go to like cold weather survival school, things like that. But it is definitely the place that I want it to be. This is what I thought I was getting into when I went to Buds. It just took me about 7 years to get there. And then
did it put some stress on the home life since she didn't want you to do that?
It did. It did. And she didn't want it necessarily, but she still supported it.
Uh-huh.
And as best as she could. And there's no harder job than being a spouse in the military.
Yeah. Specifically
for people in special operations they're going out and having to deal with the stress of as many people as we love, as many of my friends and her friends at the time that didn't come back, and just having to be around that and all the funerals. It's awful because, at least I have control over what I'm doing, and I want to be there, and I want to go, and I want to do this. It's why I joined. The wives, they have no control. They have to be there and support and take care of the kids and go to bed every night, not knowing if they're going to wake up, being a widow. And unfortunately in our community, it happens so much.
Yeah.
And, and it was tough, but man, I couldn't imagine a different job. I couldn't imagine working with a different group of people. It's what kept me in. That's why I made a career out of it. When I joined, it was like, I'm going to do my 6 years and then I'm going to go back to my life. Even though I hated those first couple deployments, as far as the mission sets, there was never a better group of guys to work with. And I knew there's nothing on a civilian side that was going to give me the job satisfaction and the gratification I had working with those guys. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you've met some of our guys now, right? You know the type of person I'm talking about, right? And man, it was amazing. And it kept me in. It kept me coming back every single time.
So what was different after selection that you didn't anticipate whenever you joined the Navy? Like how much different was that? It was
significantly different. It's just a more, by the time I got there in 08, they'd already been getting after it for a couple of years at Dev Group. And so they were doing a different deployment cycle. So they were deploying every 6 months, right? So it was a lot of work, and the experience level over there and the professionalism compared to the team that I was coming from was a head and shoulders different. And you got on the train and you kept up, or it left without you. Yeah. So it was big boy rules over there, and you had to do your job and you had to be really good at it. And there was no time for remediation to get you up to speed. We're pros here. Let's go.
Yeah.
And, man, I ate that shit up. I loved it.
Like describe like kind of the atmosphere of what that looks like when you show up for work like when you say we're pros here, you fall in to work next to someone, whether, no matter what you're doing, what has the guy next to you done off the clock that makes him head and shoulders above?
Well, first of all, there is no off the clock. Right? You get to that command, and that is your life. That is your job every day. And, you're going home to your family, but your mind's always on work.
Well, I guess when I say off the clock, so like I remember Rob talking about how you're just expected to be at your top level. They don't necessarily micromanage what you're doing.
I gotcha.
And so what are guys doing to be head and shoulders above?
Yeah, well, it's obviously it's going to depend on what your career path is within the team, right? Mm-hmm. We'll have specialties, whether you're a sniper or a breacher or an air guy, meaning focused on the jumping side of things. And it's kind of up to you to make yourself the best possible version of that career field that you can be. And yeah, you'll get sent to some courses, whether you're a sniper or not, you're going to do some shooting courses. Everybody's going to do it. But then it's up to you to go find and seek out people to help make you better and constantly find the best guns out there and testing them and the best bullets and making yourself on your own time, going to the range and shooting so that when you are downrange, it's a no-fail mission. You're not failing at your portion of the pie. If you're the sniper, you're not missing your shot. If you're the breacher, you're not having a failed breach. And if you do, they're going to start asking why, what did you do wrong, or what didn't you do to make yourself better at your job that we failed because of something you did. And failure in that community is a hell of a motivator. Like not succeeding around your peer group is a hell of a motivator. And it's what gets guys to work every single day, that common goal of mission success. And you don't want to be the one that lets the team down. Man, I can't think of a better motivator than that.
Yeah. So you just got out of selection. Now you're headed to,
Yeah.
So would it be your third deployment?
Yes.
As a dev crew member?
Yep. So third deployment, I checked in and we blew out, meaning it was an unscheduled deployment. And, this was part of the stress that kind of like the beginning and the end of my marriage, where I came off a 7-month Iraq deployment, went right to selection, which was 8 months, was mostly on the road, checked into my squadron, and within 2 weeks we were leaving on an unscheduled deployment, came back from that one, and then went on my scheduled deployment. So for almost a year and a half, I was gone.
Wow.
It was, and the hard part.
Your kids are how old right then?
I had a daughter at that point, a single child who was, I might be, she was born 2009. So she was a baby at that point. So we had a newborn.
Was she a daddy's girl?
My younger one is the daddy's girl for sure.
Yeah.
My older one's too much like me to be a daddy's girl. So,
yeah.
But at that time it was tough, but they were still young enough to where they didn't really understand. My youngest one hadn't been born yet. She was born in 2012. So,
yeah.
But it's definitely was influential on me as, I start getting into deployments 7, 8, 9, 10. It's like, okay, not seeing my kids and my kids aren't seeing me. And you start to weigh the pros and cons of doing the job. And then as the mission starts to die down, because, we're not operating as much, it tends to make those decisions a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. So what was the tempo like in the third deployment?
Nonstop. It was what I thought I would be doing. We were going out almost nightly, going after these cells, and we were in Afghanistan on this one too. So it was a good one.
What year was that?
That was 2009.
So what was the first firefight like, having been, whoa, almost spilled that. Your first one is, you're now in SEAL Team 6.
Yeah.
So was that what I'm sure you remember it. What was that? What was that setup?
The first time I fired my gun, it wasn't even a firefight. It was just, it's hard to explain, right? And you train so much and you practice so much, and you're around a group of guys that this is what they've been doing. For me, I'm just wide eyed, like, oh shit. I know how I'm going to react now, because you don't really know until the fire starts coming at you what you're going to do. I mean, you have a good idea based on your training, and you hope that you do the right things, but you're green. And for me, that first time, it was surreal. Everything was in slow motion. It's hard to see everything around you. You get very fixated on where the fire is coming from, vice thinking about all the stuff that's around you, right? Because it's not necessarily going to be the guy in front of you that shoots you. It might be the guy that's flanking you, right? So basic military tactics. So that first firefight it's kind of an eye-opening experience. And when you get back and you start thinking about it and talking about it and debriefing it with the people, you realize, okay, like that, I can't do that. I need to be not here. I need to be here. And you pick it up really quick, especially being around people that have done it dozens of times at that point.
Did you play high school football?
I did. Yep.
So with rodeo, we having ridden bulls and also bucking horses. One thing I talked to the guys that
a lot of these interns came here to learn how to ride bulls and ride bucking horses. It's really intense for a short amount of time. You got to stay on a bull 8 seconds. Same thing with a bronc. And then, it's probably, upwards of 10 or 15 after that before the pickup man may show up. So for at most, maybe 20 seconds, you're alone on this bucking horse out in the arena. And the very first time you do it, it's much like your very first varsity football game. Yeah. And everything's a blur. It happens real fast. And then as you develop in your career as a rodeo cowboy, it really slows down. And you can hear the pickup man talking to you. You can see your shadow. If it's a matinee perf, you can hear, man, I can't believe that. I remember one time bucking off because I was just so fixated. Like in the middle of the ride, they played "I Can't Feel My Face When I'm With You," and this horse went to the fence and took a. But I remember thinking, like, man, they don't ever play that song. They don't play that song during the ride much. And then he took a right and I took a left. But my point is I don't want to bounce around too much. But your first one, now that you're thinking about it, like, how different was that than, let's say, your last one 9 deployments later?
Significantly, right? And my last one, I was in a leadership position too. So you're seeing the entire battlefield at that point. And honestly, I would say by the end of that first deployment, I was seeing. You
were closer to that.
I was much closer to that than I was to the
because
beginning.
It was so heavy of a
so
tempo.
much work, right? And it doesn't take much to get you to realize where you need to be and what you need to be seeing, because it's your life and it's the life of the guys around you on the line if you fail. So it's a great analogy. And I always use the skydiving analogy. The first time you jump out of a plane, all you see is the ground, because that's what's going to kill you.
Hey, old son, if you're not feeding every morning with a Can-Am side-by-side, then you ain't no cowboy. I got a Can-Am because I needed a reliable ranch rig that I could use every day, because I don't know how to work on stuff like that. So I want something that's not going to break down ever. Get yourself a Can-Am, old son. Rock and roll denim is what Dale Brisby uses to spur his bucking bulls. I get the reflex. Gives me the mobility I need to be the cowboy I am. So go to rockandrolldenim.com, old son.
And then after you do a couple hundred jumps, you're out there looking around, playing with your friends, and you're seeing everything, right? It's kind of that. And in battle, it's the same thing. And it's funny, I can think of some firefights where I'm in where I've stopped and I've seen like shooting stars. I'm like, oh man, that's pretty. And then, get back in the fight, and you're the physiological response that you have to the stress that's being imposed on you. You've learned to deal with it. Whether it's a subconscious or conscious level, you realize I have control over the fact that, I'm losing dexterity in my limbs, or I'm getting tunnel vision, and you can control it much better because you're putting yourself into those stressful situations repeatedly. And this is a lot of what we try to teach police now who don't have any training on how to deal with stress. And I would imagine riding a bull is pretty fucking stressful. And once you learn how to harness that level of stress, you realize that you're capable of a lot more than you think you are. And that's what BUDS is about. And SQT, like the after BUDS, is trying to teach you how to deal with the stress the best way they can without actually shooting live rounds at you.
Yeah.
So when you do have the live rounds coming at you, all right, now I'm falling back into my training. I know what to do now. I know how to handle this. So that ability to handle the stress comes a lot quicker, I think, than most people who don't have that type of training to get them into that spot. But it didn't take long.
Does it ever get too, I guess the training is what keeps you sharp. I'm trying to think of moments where there's times now, having been in and around the arena for so many years, I really feel it the most when I'm not the one actually participating, but bullfighting, for instance. So the bull rider gets on, and whether he makes a qualified ride or not, there's no pickup man for a bull rider, but there are 2 bullfighters. And what they'll do is if this bull's bucking and let's say the rider lands where the edge of this table is from the bullfighter's job this would be the gap between the bull and the bull rider. The bullfighter's going to slide through this gap and grab that bull's attention, and he's got cleats on and he knows the fundamentals to get around that bull. And there's 2 of them, and they'll work the bull and really just try to take him out into the open arena where this guy can get away, because he's pretty vulnerable when he lands maybe on all 4s. But so I've done that a lot, fought bulls, and I've found myself sometimes, like when I'm not, like I say, I'm not involved, but I just get a little numb to the action.
Yeah.
Having been around it
for a while, and us talking about these analogies, I'm just curious, did you ever get later on in your career numb enough to the action that it was detrimental?
I would say yes. And a lot of that is because you do the same thing so many times without consequence. And it's funny because I try to teach this to younger guys that there's a reason we have fundamentals, and I'm sure you guys have fundamentals as well. But when you do something repeatedly and there's no negative consequence to it, you feel enabled to keep doing that, especially when you feel comfortable even in a dangerous situation. So there have been times in fights where I've done the exact thing that I've taught people not to do, and just no negative consequence, right?
Yeah.
But I've also had a time where I've done that and I've gotten shot, right? And it's like, well, why did I do that? Because I became too comfortable in uncomfortable situations that I stopped listening to what the fundamentals were supposed to be and did the thing that I did 1,000 times and didn't pay the man for. It only takes once though, right?
Yep. In your line of work for sure.
Yep.
Before we get into the other deployments, I got to talk to Eddie Gallagher about this during his podcast, but with Rob, we didn't talk about it till we were on the way home, and he had a lot of respect for the analogy, at least. But in bull riding, there's I'm sure they exist. I know that these people have said they exist in the military as well, but I wouldn't know. But I'm curious your opinion. In bull riding, there's a lot of guys that like to have ridden bulls, but they don't like to ride bulls. And I think also being friends with Cowboy Cerrone in the UFC, I feel like the same would apply with like fighting. There's a lot of guys that like to say they have fought, and Cerrone is one that, if somebody was to try to fight him at a gas station, it's a dream come true for him. A dream come true. Like, he loves the actual fight, and there's guys in rodeo and bull riding, they love the actual fight of being on a bull.
Yep.
And I think that's what it takes to get to an elite level. Did you experience those kind of people? And are there any that get to the SEAL Team 6 level?
Yeah, we have the saying, everybody wants to be a team guy on Friday, right? Because nobody necessarily wants to put in the work Monday to Friday, but then on the weekend they want to be able to go to the bars and be like, yeah, I'm a Navy SEAL, right? So we definitely have it. And I think we do a pretty good job of identifying those people early on. It doesn't mean we necessarily get rid of them, but it would be a lot harder for them to get picked up for selection for Dev Group. And very few of those people will actually make it to Dev Group. And I think we're such a small, tight-knit community, especially at the Tier 1 level, at the Dev Group level, that if it's really easy to see when someone's more about flaunting the trident than they are about doing the job. And those are the people that we don't want there. Mm-hmm. And we're pretty good. I think we're pretty good about weeding those people out early enough that they're not getting to that level. And, to me, it's detrimental to the command. It's not the kind of guy we want there. It's not team cohesion. It's not unity. It's that self-gratifying bullshit that we try to avoid.
I can sense guys. I feel like I can. I'm not that great at reading people, but I do really respect, and it gets me so pumped when I see a guy and you see it in their eyes in the buck and shoot.
Yeah.
And they crave that moment. There's no hesitation. They're, they're waiting on you.
Yep.
Let's get this. Let's buck a bull. Let's buck a bronc. And I love it. I have so much respect for it. Is that, I just envision like a SEAL Team 6 guy, like the first crack of a bullet, like it's just like, oh, it's on.
Yeah, I mean,
is that how it is for guys? Or
I think so. Do you see that when you're looking at that person in the shoot? Is it because you see yourself in them? Right? Is it? Are you self-identifying? This is how I am. I enjoy seeing people that share the way that I live my life.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe. I would hope so. Maybe that's it. So there's multiple events. There's bareback riding, which is a bareback rigging. You put your hand in. There's saddle bronc riding. It's a full saddle. Those are both bucking horses. And then there's bull riding where you get on. So there's 3 main rough stock events. And then you've got bull fighters. So 4 that you can really get down and dirty in.
Yep.
Bareback riding scares the shit out of me. like I would, like if you run a hopper in there, I'm okay with it. You run a bucker in there, you run an actual bucker in there, like I'm nervous. Like I hope I don't get hurt. Now in the bronc riding and the bull riding, I love it and I crave it. Like give me the bucker. Like what's, like let's go head to head. That's what I want. And so maybe the bareback riding gave me perspective. You can get hung up this weird way in bareback riding, and it's just rough. And I got a lot of respect for the killers in bareback riding that have that fire in their eyes, because that's a man's event there. I kind of feel that. I feel that I have that in these other 2 events.
Sure.
But regardless, I don't know. Maybe that is what it is. Maybe I do. Or maybe I'm just seeing what I hope is in me. I don't know.
Again, we worry about how we look to our peers, right? And I see that in my guys, and I want guys like that too. And, we always say devil's in the details, right? Who is trying to be the best version of that bull rider, the best version of that bronc rider, right? That's what I look for. Who's the guy that doesn't want to just come in and do the job and then go home and it's just a job to them? Who's the guy that when they go home, they're online trying to find new weapon systems or trying to be better at their craft? That's the guy that I want. And to me, that's the fire. People that live that life.
I think one thing, so when I'm in the chute, one of my mentors his name's Lyle Sankey, he's in the Hall of Fame. One of the only 4 individuals in pro rodeo to make it to the NFR in all 3 of those rough stock events I mentioned, bears, broncs, bulls. And he quoted Mickey Mantle, and he said, rodeo, like baseball, is 90% mental and the rest is in your head. And it's kind of a joke, but also, once you get to a certain physical level where if a guy can do 20, 30 chin-ups, pull-ups, you can probably physically ride a bull. It's just going to all come down to mental. And I understand what he means now, decade or a couple decades later, because it is all between your ears. And you realize guys like JB Mooney, like there's nothing special about him physically. It's what he's convinced himself of in his mind. And when I know how I ride if I hesitate. I know how I ride if I let my emotions, take over. And I love more than anything sports-wise, that moment when I can face this animal, nod my head, and I don't let one emotion slow me down from executing the fundamentals. And that's when I feel most complete. And for me personally, it was spurring on the first jump, because in bronc riding, a lot of guys like to check up. They like to D up, make sure it feels good, and then go to them. And your score will suffer from it. You can also hold them for 2, which is fine. That's great. But for me, I wanted to spur that first jump and ride through the whistle, whatever. When and how have emotions played a role in a firefight for you? Because I think that's where it's at.
And I think emotions don't play a role in a firefight, right? It's a very cognitive process that you've trained time and time again. And you're responding almost intuitively, right? You're reading the situation and you're responding accordingly. But if you allow emotion to play a role, you're somewhat limiting your ability to respond. And I think we do a really good job of training that out. Now, when we get back, there's definitely emotion. It's hard not to be emotional about that, but I think you're suppressing it during the firefight and allowing it to come out later, or you're not allowing it to come out at all. And I don't know if that's a great thing, but to me, I can't think of a firefight or a time where I've been in a situation where I've had any emotion at all other than what's my job, what's my next job.
So I guess the emotion I would be addressing is fear.
Fear
is that the one that shows up later?
I think that shows up before and later. It's funny. I was thinking about this yesterday. There's anybody that tells you you're not afraid before going into a firefight is full, right? And I can remember fairly recently standing on the ramp of a C-130 or C-17 with the ramp open over a country where I know everybody on the ground wants to kill me, and looking at the guy next to me, and be like, all right, let's go. And we jump. And we're fucking terrified, right? We're jumping into the unknown at 24,000 feet into a country where nobody wants us, and they, potentially jump into our death, but we do it anyway. And as soon as you leave the ramp, the fear goes away, and it's focus, and you're thinking about the mission, you're thinking about your training, and you're thinking about what you have to get done. And then when you finish up, and honestly, this is something where years later, looking back at it, it's like, holy shit, that's scary. And then it will come back to you, or you'll have a dream, or you'll be talking to your buddies, or you'll look at the guys that are doing it now and realize that you did that 5 years ago, and you're scared. But
for them,
for me and for them, scared that I actually did that, and that these guys are doing it now and have to do it all the time. But when you're in it, when you actually boots off the ramp, or when you're walking into target and you're 100 yards away, knowing that, man, the next 100 yards, they're probably going to start shooting at us. It's terrifying until you take that first step off. And I think that's what separates.
I don't know why I was picturing like a target. Like, who's going to be shooting at you at a target? What kind of target are you visiting?
Yeah, not a cardboard target.
No, I mean like the store is what I was picturing. I thought you were talking about when you get back.
Yeah, like a Walmart target. Yeah.
I was like, pictured you for more of a Walmart guy myself.
You go. Yeah, 100%.
So how did you? I guess you had to learn how to, in your first deployment, your third one, as your first one with action.
Yeah.
How did your emotions play a role in that one?
Again, I don't think it did. And I would say, I guess, I don't know if I would say this, but the question becomes is this a trait among guys at high-performing levels where they're able to control their emotions so that they're not affecting their processes? Or is this something that we get taught through our training to be able to control? And I don't have the answer for you, but I will say that there's always fear until it's time to work. And there's always, even a little bit of self-doubt. Like, am I going to be able to do this until it's time to go to work, until you step off and go to work? So I don't think it, at that level, by the time I got to that command and was on target, emotions were not an issue for me. And they weren't an issue for the guys around me. And if they were, they probably were in the wrong place. And we need to address why or how they got there.
Did you ever go back to Ramadi?
Not after that. Nope. Never went back to Iraq.
That slow one.
That was it.
They were the next, I guess, 8 after your third one, or the 9. Your last 9 were all Afghanistan.
Most of them were Afghanistan, Africa, a couple to Africa, and a couple, one to other places. But the majority of deployments were Afghanistan, and that was just from 08 to 15, 16. That's where the combat was. That's what we were doing. That's where we were deploying, and it was busy.
What was a mission where you feel like it was like, man, I am Sheen, like I am a Navy SEAL. That was the coolest thing we've ever done.
I think anything where we have to skydive in is a pretty cool mission, right? There's not a lot of people that get to say I did that into a foreign country and then went to war when I landed.
Yeah.
There's definitely missions we had that where the firefights were just epic, and stuff you'd see out of a movie, and you're doing it in real life and realizing that, this is the stuff people actually make movies about, and we get to do it for real. There's so many missions like that. I don't think I could tell you a specific one.
What was it like to skydive into a mission?
It's scary as hell.
But I mean, like, walk me through just like, where do you skydive into, and then how far do you have to go? Like, what does that mission
It depends,
look like?
right? And it all depends on the mission, and you want to be far enough away to where you can get in unseen, but close enough to where you can still walk to the target in a period of darkness and be able to affect the mission.
Yeah.
And funny story, the last one I did, we jumped in and I hit the ground and I stand up and I see headlights coming right at me. I'm like, well, okay, this is bad. And I stand up and I start running and I didn't have time to take my chute off. And so my chute is fully inflated, my big military rig behind me, which if you look at like the sprinters and they do the running, but this is, a 300 whatever canopy, it's gigantic. And I'm full speed, but probably, less than walking, moving as these headlights are coming at me. And I just look to my left and I see a line of dudes doing the exact same thing, like 5 dudes just full sprint trying to get away from these headlights with canopies inflated behind them. And then we all stop and just settle down and the canopies just fall down and they drive right through us and never saw us.
Wow.
Yeah. Just totally random that this person just happened to be driving out in the middle of nowhere when, a bunch of Navy SEALs just landed and drove right between us. And then we got up and dusted ourselves off and went.
How far you have to trot?
For that one, I don't know. I think we were probably about 7 or 8K away from the target that we had to walk. So it was a good hour and a half.
78K.
7 or 8K. It was a good
60 miles.
It was a good walk. It's a good walk at night in the dark. And, knowing you're walking to a firefight.
Yeah.
A lot of time to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to respond. And
what was it like in Afghanistan? Like which deployment was the heaviest tempo?
The first one, for sure. And what we saw over repeated deployments is that the enemy started to understand our tactics more and started to respond differently, knowing that we had ROEs, knowing we have to abide by a certain code, right? That's what separates us from the savages, and realizing that if they don't have any weapons on them, we can't shoot them. Right. So they were getting savvy and smart enough to hide the weapons, to bury them and only take them out when they would go attack convoys or do the things they needed to do. And it made it a lot harder for us to do our job. So the further we got into the conflict, the further I got into deployments, the less kinetic that our operations were. And it was more going out and capturing people and finding people and then arresting them.
Yeah.
Occasionally towards the end, we would get in a good firefight, or we'd start moving into a different country or different areas where, those rules didn't apply anymore. And it was back to the beginning where they wanted to fight. And, when you shot, anybody within earshot was coming out with a gun and shooting back at you.
Dang.
So it got dicey. And that's what, the next battlefield, that's what it's going to look like, right? It's not going to be what we just saw for 2 decades. It's going to be something completely different. The technology on the enemy side is going to be much more advanced. They're going to have some of the capabilities we have, especially if it's a first world country. So it's scary. And
what would the next conflict look like?
It's hard to say. It depends on who it's with and where we go. But in my experience, the war on terror and extremism is pretty low on the priority list. So
what do you mean?
Meaning, I think we're more concerned with Russia, with China, with North Korea, with Iran than we are with any of these countries, like Afghanistan, and that's a scary thought because those are technologically advanced countries with first world militaries that can actually reach out and touch us from a distance, that has the ability to identify us coming into their country before we're in the country. We can't sneak in to those places the way we used to. So it's a much more conventional operation than special forces. It's a scary thought.
What do you feel after having been in the Navy 18 years, 12 deployments, you've seen evil in multiple countries, you've fought it, you've seen firsthand what those evil people do to women and children, to innocent people.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I'm really not trying to get into politics, but I'm really curious, like just you personally, how you feel. Let's say let's remove the budget side of it.
Yep.
Like, do you feel that we have an obligation to seek out some of this evil and take it off the earth?
I think that's such a broad question.
I realize that. I'm just, or do we just mind our own business?
I think if we have agreements with countries that we're going to protect each other, then we're obligated to protect some of those countries. And I think there's evil out there that if we don't stop it at its root, it's going to find its way to us.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't we want to nip that in the bud?
Yeah.
I also do think we spend a lot of time helping and assisting countries that we shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously I won't get into specifics, but it is pretty eye-opening as I got towards later in my career at a senior level, seeing how much policy from DC dictates what we're doing on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize, unfortunately, how insignificant you are as a warfighter based on who is in office. And, that's not to say that one side of the aisle is different than the other. Clearly they are, but, we were working quite a bit during the Obama administration, but it was different than the Bush administration or the Trump administration, right? So you realize quickly that you're a pawn, and it's very frustrating. And I think a lot of people end up getting out of the military because of that. And, and it's not why I got out, but it certainly was a frustrating reason that helped me make my decision. But it's a big world out there, and there's a lot of bad people, and we can't go after all of them.
Yeah, because you do have to circle back to reality, and we don't have the resources to fight evil in every country around the world.
Right.
We simply don't. I'm asking that question just for me, just because, I don't know. I mean, like, where does it stop? Because I got a DM from a company that, because I like to occasionally give to these random.
Mm-hmm.
They're not so random, but just like groups that fight, for instance, sex trafficking, and things like that. And I've donated to this other organization that provides clean water, and through a trusted friend, I trust that every dollar goes to actually providing water to. Anyways, I'm not trying to brag about where I give money. I'm just trying to say, like, at what point, though, do I sell everything? Do I sell, like, my car, my house, and everything and donate it over there? And I'm just curious because I've not seen the evil over there. And that's what makes me ask you where your heart's at, like, after having seen what they do to children.
Yeah, yes. And how much of it should we be, putting our hand on? I don't know. As someone who runs a nonprofit that could benefit greatly from federal support, it frustrates me to no end when we're sending billions, hundreds of billions of dollars overseas to help countries that I think should be helping themselves. And we're doing it before we're fixing the problems on our own soil. That's what's frustrating to me.
So what logical reason? I'm not trying to get in politics. I'm literally curious. Like, I want you to speak on their behalf.
I don't know if I know any logic, but
one good reason why $87 million a week is going to the Taliban?
Yeah.
Do you know one? Like, what would they say in their defense?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And
after having fought them for 20 years, and now there's money going to them in a circular manner. I'm just curious, like, what's the I really want to see it from the other side. You're educated, more educated on the matter than anybody I know. Yeah. And you're sitting in front of me. What about the way we pulled out of Afghanistan? Any logical reason to leave all that stuff behind?
No.
I mean, like, there's
nobody in the military that I know or have served with that thinks that we did that correctly. And I can't imagine anybody who was in the military that was in charge of those decisions supported it.
Even budget-wise, right? It makes sense to bring it back, right?
Any which way, yeah. Or at least destroy it. If you're not going to bring stuff back, don't just leave it. Just destroy it. But the fact that we lost lives pulling out.
We left the keys to the soldiers over there.
Yeah, a lot of stuff that Taliban's rolling around in with right now, or selling and making more money off of, right? It's very frustrating from my perspective as someone that spent years in that country to watch how quickly we gave it up and allowed the atrocities in losing service members over doing it in a manner that was so rash and rushed and unthought out.
Yeah.
And as if we didn't learn our lesson in Vietnam, right? And there is zero excuse for that.
Okay.
In my opinion, zero.
Again, I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just curious from a guy that I didn't ask Rob that or anybody that.
It's infuriating to us. It's infuriating to watch it happen real time was awful. And you knew it was going to happen.
Talking about the evil in these other countries, like hearing Eddie describe it was pretty neat because he said, I don't know, you can argue about why we're over there.
Yep.
But he was talking about pulling into this one city and seeing the remains of what they had done to kids and innocent. And he said, I know that this is evil and I get to take it off this earth. How did you, because 12 deployments, you had to, you're obviously okay with going over there. Like, how did you rationalize that when those thoughts of like, what are we doing over here came up?
I mean, I think a 9/11.
Similar fashion.
Yeah, 100%. 9/11 is why I was there. Like, they brought the fight to us. To me, everything we did over there was retribution for them coming after us in the first place. I'd never lost a second sleep over pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
Never once. I lost a lot of sleep over not pulling the trigger.
Yep.
The times where I said, you know what, maybe this doesn't fit in our ROEs, or I don't know, I can't take this shot, knowing that this person will probably get arrested and be back on the streets in a week or at very worst 2 years, and they're back on the streets. So
I hope you're enjoying a ranch fuel as you're listening to this episode of Rodeo Time. Use code DALE on ranchfuel.com for 15% off, old son. Drink up and use code DALE on ranchfuel.com. Ever since I started riding bulls and punching fools, I've been wearing an American hat because I'm an American. I actually wore a different hat before that for the longest, but then my mom got a job. So wear an American hat, old son. Otherwise, you ain't no cowboy.
There is, big picture, there is little value on human life in a lot of these places, and it's just a culturally different perspective on humanity. And we can't expect them to think or treat people the way that we do, or value life in general the way that we do. So there's zero issues in treating other men, other women, children, for whatever reason, justified or not, like some of the most horrible things you'll ever see. And that's life to them. That's how they live. And it's generational. We're not coming in and changing that.
Had you seen guys get busted for ROE stuff?
I've seen a lot of guys get investigated for it. And a lot of it is preemptive investigation, just in case there is an actual investigation. But there, unfortunately, as the war went on and it became more political, there was a lot of second guessing actions, which we see it in law enforcement now. Like, where if you're going to question every time there's a shooting by a police officer, and whether it's good or not, then you're going to have people that don't want to police anymore.
Yeah.
And then how do we control society when we're not policing it because we're afraid of retribution of doing our job? It's the same thing over there, right? If you're going to question me every time I pull the trigger, well, I'm just going to stop going on ops and not pull the trigger, right? Because I don't want to lose my career, my job, or worse, go to prison over doing something that was well within my means. Not that it ever happened to me, not that it happened to any of my guys, but there were certainly times where people had charges brought up on them for shoots. And in my opinion, whether they're good or bad, you're not in that guy's head. And unless it was a willful intent to murder, then you can't question why someone took a shot in war. Right? That is their job.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating. It's something that early on, I would say through the majority of my career was never a real issue. And then it started to become an issue later in my career. And, I'll say I'm glad I'm not there anymore for that.
What made them button down?
I don't know.
Later.
I don't know. Public sentiment, you look at how much the media influenced Vietnam. It's the same thing. And we're never going to have a war that's not influenced by the media anymore or by social media. So when we see things that are negative press in the military, in war, there's a knee-jerk reaction to want to try and fix it by putting policies into place that make no sense.
So what is it that the media is doing that's making people support Hamas?
I don't know if I'd necessarily blame the media or just fundamental stupidity on anybody that would support Hamas. And
are they just as bad as like Taliban and ISIS?
I don't necessarily know that they are, certainly not to us, but I think the problem here is that people aren't able to differentiate between the Palestinians and Hamas. And yeah, you can support.
You mean like physically? Like they just
not
can't,
physically, like to realizing that Hamas and a Palestinian citizen are different, right? Hamas is a terrorist organization that controls Palestine, but most Palestinians, a lot of them don't support Hamas, but they all get lumped into the same category.
Gotcha.
And I think a lot of these anti-Israel
like
people,
Americans get lumped into sometimes the Democrats. Like
exactly. Yeah.
And just kidding.
No, you ain't wrong. But you can talk to a Palestinian and they don't agree with Hamas. But at the end of the day, Hamas runs that country. And if you're going to allow this organization to operate in your country, then you're going to take some criticism for it. So I other than the shit that goes on in some of the colleges nowadays to brainwash these kids into these really hypercritical views of foreign policy, then it's really hard to understand why anybody would support a terrorist organization. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm speechless sometimes at some of these people.
Did they really like just cut stuff off after Trump got elected recently? Did Hamas like really like rein it in?
I don't have any firsthand information. I only know what you see on TV and what I see on TV. And to be truthful, like how much can you believe of what you see on TV these days?
So once you guys retire, like you don't really, unless you're like actively got a buddy that's there and you're talking to him every day, you don't really stay privy to any of that.
No, not at all. Yeah, man. Once you're out, it's like you get off the train keeps going, and without you, and if it's directly related to what our guys were doing, and I get to talk to the guys, we'll get some information, but there's not a lot going on for us in
they're also
in that
only
part of the world right now.
Tell you so much in a text message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Probably nothing in a text message, but
right. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. How when you get out, like
it's crazy,
just cut you off, or
you're
whenever
done.
Like somebody dies and then their spouse gets cut off like that night.
Yeah,
isn't it that quick? How quick that like a Gold Star family member gets cut off?
I think we're pretty good in our community about supporting the Gold Star wives.
Yeah, but the actual military is not.
Tough. No, and I would like to think that they're getting better, just because we've had to do it so many times at this point. But there's a lot of things the military needs to do better and can do better, and I like to think personally that they're making strides to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously it's not always happening, and we're still seeing some crazy going on in our community and in the military on the whole. And I would hope that this next administration walks it back a little bit on fundamentally on some of the things that they're trying to take out of the culture of the military, specifically along the lines of DEI, that I think are making us a less lethal fighting force.
How does DEI kind of conversations and I guess rules that they're trying to enforce take a role in SEAL Team 6 and DevGru?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're still part of the military. And if the broad military wants to enforce DEI training, then we have to do it as well.
Yeah, but how do they enforce something that, I mean, like surely they're not being lenient on somebody during an 8th-month selection.
At the end of the day, you can push the DEI all you want, but as long as we're not changing the standard of what it takes to get into the service, and I think in BUDS we haven't done that yet. Even though it's been opened up to women, we haven't changed the standard, and you haven't seen a woman get through or get into BUDS at this point.
Dang.
The same thing with getting to the command. There's no changing the standard to get through selection. So,
what is it that keeps, like at what point does a woman fail before they get to BUDS?
Honestly, I've never firsthand experienced this, but there's a physical standard, and it's really hard. Just based on the physiological makeup of a woman to be able to maintain the physical standard needed and then still have all the attributes to be able to do the other.
What's the standard to get into BUDS?
I don't know, man. This was 20-something years ago.
You don't remember that?
I don't remember that at all, man.
What is it? Is it like
it's
a 100
run
push-ups in a row or something like that?
It's not even. It's like, and if I'm wrong, I can see the comments now. It's something like 90 push-ups, 80 sit-ups, 10 dead hang pull-ups, and then you have to do a 1.5 mile run and a 500-meter swim.
But something like that.
Yeah, there's a physical standard.
That's
right.
whether the numbers are give or take 10 or whatever. Like that's
right.
Yeah.
And to get into buds now, and it wasn't this way back then, all you had to do was pass the standard and you got a shot. Now it's because so many people are trying to do it. It's all right. Who was my top performer? And they go down the list.
Dang.
And it's like, those are mostly men, right? Because men just perform better at the physical aspect in most cases. Not that there's not bad women
For sure.
that can meet that standard.
And whoop my ass 100%.
Both of us, right?
Yeah.
But it hasn't happened to where there's a woman that has been able to meet that standard and make it into the training. And that's fine. If someone wants to meet the standard, then meet the standard, but don't change the standard. That's the fear.
I guess that's where my question was. Like, I realize that's the fear. Is that, I mean, like, surely whoever's in charge at the military would be smart enough to not change the standard when it comes to Tier 1 and Tier 2 qualifications.
I mean, there's not one special operator or Tier 1 or any level that said, you know what, my job would be easier if I had a woman.
Yeah.
But now we are told you will open up your ranks to women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there was a lot of pushback. There's been pushback, but this is politics. This isn't military. This is politicians saying this, you will do this. So we're run by DC. Everything is political. So it doesn't matter if someone in the military is saying it. If you're told by DC, by the administration that you will open up the ranks, then we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And we can control right now the standards, and let's hope that we can control the standards, but you get one person in the wrong position that sides with that administration, and then you run the risk of losing control of even that. It's tough, and it's a scary thought, right? We don't want to lower the standard and then lower our ability to fight the enemy because we're trying to appease a politician.
Do you think there was a push to weed out some of you guys that had like just some of the war fighters that came out of Afghanistan?
No, not at all. I think if anything, I think there was a scramble to try and retain that talent, right? And obviously they didn't do a good enough job because a lot of guys did get out. And I can't say I blame them because when the mission goes away, a lot of times it's the mission that's keeping guys there. And as the mission faded, the guys decided it was time to move on. When you don't have work operations driving, then the busy work comes into play, and you start doing things that guys don't want to do. Dog and pony shows where you're just showing your force to hopefully find more work, and guys don't appreciate that stuff, right? They're there for a reason. They're there to go to war. They're there to fight, and when you take that away from them, it's hard to retain guys because it's a mindset, and it's a skill level that the guys are there. You wouldn't want to be a pro bull rider and never get to ride a bull.
For sure.
You wouldn't want to be in the NFL and never get to play.
Do that.
Right?
Right. Yeah, I would never do that.
Right. So, and it's hard, but at the end of the day, you have guys like me and some of the other guys, Rob, that you had on that have so much operational experience and knowledge that they could be teaching if you found a way to retain them. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we can't. We haven't retained that knowledge. And look at me. Like, I still want to give back. I still want to serve. And now I just do it for myself, for my nonprofit, and help a community that I think is underserved, which is law enforcement. And so I've taken all this 2 decades of tactical experience and knowledge and training, and I'm putting it as much as I can into police and hopefully protecting our families and my kids and your kids and everybody that's out there that deserves that level of protection.
Going back to these deployments and your eyesight opening up, your tunnel vision opening up, can you describe to me the way you would see a battlefield in number 12 compared to number 3?
Yeah.
So, or 11 or 12, whichever one had.
As a new guy, so when I'm a new guy again on that third pump, and to me, I'm very, in whatever my role is, that's my job. And I don't really see too much at that point past whatever my job is. And I'm a door kicker, I'm an assaulter. I think I was a breacher on that deployment, meaning, if we had to get in somewhere, I'm putting charges on doors. Right. That was my world. That was where I was living. Later on, I'm a team leader, and I'm looking big picture. I'm thinking a lot more tactically. How am I managing my people? Where am I putting my guys? I'm the guy that's building the plan before we go in and looking at strategy and maneuvering and, well, what do I expect the enemy to do, and trying to be ahead of the game and on the tactical side. So I'm not looking at a specific job like a sniper or a breacher or, whatever it may be, a medic. I'm looking at the whole battlefield, the whole team, and trying to manage my team efficiently and accordingly based on the response we're getting from the enemy.
So I kind of crave y'all's stories, and had a couple years there where I probably read 15 books.
Mm-hmm.
10 of them I think were from different SEALs. I'm sure you've played a role in some of them where the names were changed or whatever, but one of my favorite stories is the Mike Monsoor one, where he jumped on the grenade, and was it 2 other SEALs that he helped save, or was it?
Yeah, I think there were 3 guys on the rooftop with him.
Were they all SEALs?
I think they were all SEALs. I know Mike Sorelli, who actually did his podcast, was one of the guys on the rooftop with him.
Really?
I went to Bud's with him.
Dang.
He's down in his podcast is out of Austin now. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
was that was Ramadi, correct?
Correct.
So not the rotation. You were there.
No. So those were West Coast guys. I was an East Coast guy. So I think they either replaced us or we replaced them, something along that line.
You bet.
But yeah.
Well, what was something? Did you get to see that firsthand? Something like that?
As far as
just a
that
moment,
level of heroism, or as
just a heroic moment.
It's hard to explain to people why you're going through it, but that's stuff you see on a daily basis when you're around that group of guys. Specifically,
that's what blows
at
my
the
mind.
Command. And guys can get can receive the Medal of Honor or receive these high awards, and it's very deservingly so. But for every guy that gets it, there's a dozen guys who did the same or better who didn't get it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. It's kind of arbitrary. And you see that kind of heroism, especially early on when we were, sustained operations going out nightly. You see it all the time. And from everybody. It's not just, all right, well, that's the one guy that's always doing it. It's every single dude. It's just a matter of, were they in the right spot and had the opportunity to do something heroic. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons I stayed in so long is because, man, who wouldn't want to work with guys like that every single day? Right? It's amazing.
That's what blows my mind. It's like you guys are, there's no telling what you would see every night.
Yeah.
And like cowboying, gathering cows, ranching, whatever, you get to see something cool happen where this guy ropes this bull or this cow and this wild thing happen like every now and then. And it's kind of wild. And, but then same thing with rodeo. Like, oh man, this bull did this tonight and so.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys, like, it's just crazy to me. The other thing that kind of makes me wonder is, in my day-to-day, whether I'm driving down the road and I pass through a town that I've been to before for a rodeo, or I smell a certain smell that reminds me of this or that experience, I can't imagine having the memories attached. Like, yeah, I'll think about going to this rodeo with this friend and this ride happened that night, or this buck off, or this person, broke their ankle, whatever, got a concussion. Those memories sneak up on someone like yourself with 12 deployments, where it's like you might think of this random deal that happens on your 7th one that you hadn't thought about in years. You maybe completely forgot about it, but this smell of this certain food or whatever just brought it back for whatever reason.
You know what?
Is that a thing?
100%. The big one is movie lines, like quotes from movies. I can break down my deployments by movies. What was
because
the movie?
Y'all were quoting it on the deployment.
Because we're quoting it on target.
Oh,
like we're
man.
doing targets and we're like, oh, Mother Nature just did her pantsuit, right? Like,
yeah,
it's, Iraq. I remember, God, Wedding Crashers was out. So they, through that whole deployment, we're out there. We're just quoting lines from that movie.
Yeah, Mom, the meatloaf.
God, I took a sip of this and I'm like, holy fuck, it's an orange Rip It. Rip It's the only thing we could only get those overseas. And little things like that. A song will come on and it'll remind me of a person. And when I start thinking about the guy, well, I was on that deployment with them, and these are some of the targets, and it's things that you haven't thought of in a long time. Or if we have, for whatever reason, we get to hang out with a guy that we haven't seen in a decade, or talk to him, and you start talking about the deployment, and you remember things. They remember things that you forget, and vice versa. And I wish we were better at doing stuff like that. I wish I had taken notes.
Yeah, and Cody J. Byers. Gosh dang it. He remember everything from elementary school. It haunts me.
Well, I think I drank too much. I don't remember anything from last week. So
I was talking to, I believe he was a SEAL Team 6 guy, but I know he was.
All right.
But he was saying that he was thinking that, in his opinion, the CTE is really what affects guys negatively the most when it comes to PTSD, not so much losing their brothers, because they were doing what they love to do. And he, he was saying, like, I can think of some of my friends that I lost, and don't get me wrong, it saddens me and I'll cry for them, but also, like, we knew what we were doing over there. And he was saying that all the blasts that you take over the years and the CTE is really what he felt led guys to, if I understood him correctly, which I think I did.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's not far off. I certainly think there's guys that struggle with losing their friends and have a hard time, especially if it's on operations that they were on, or really close friends. But there's so much data coming out now on the level of blast exposure that our guys have been, receiving throughout long careers, like me. And God, now I think I talked about this yesterday. The rules we have to follow now for exposure to training charges have completely changed from when I went through.
Yeah.
Significantly. Like, well, what the fuck were we doing back then? If like you can't stand within 15 feet of that thing now, and I was 5 feet away from it, and it was just like, hey man, cover your nuts in case the doorknob comes off.
And I let me say this, just I don't want to interrupt you, but I know there's always exceptions to that rule.
Yeah.
You can't tell maybe Marcus Luttrell that, or all the guys that
agreed,
that knew, Extortion 17, like, obvious, if you had 6 of your best friends were on that, then obviously this was just, we're speaking in generalities, is I want to clarify that. I'm not it's not a blanket statement, but I feel like, because I know guys in rodeo that I've hit their head a lot, and one friend in particular that later, committed suicide, that a lot of people felt that may have played a role in his mindset. Yeah. And I had not really ever thought about it till he told me that. And we were at the Danny Dietz Memorial when he did. And anyway, I've been curious guys' opinions. That's why
I think it's absolutely a thing. Do you know who Chris Nowitzki is?
No, sir.
So he runs a foundation called Concussion Legacy, and he went to Harvard, played football there, and then left Harvard and was a professional wrestler, WWF wrestler. Had too many concussions, left that, and around that time, his college roommate who went to play in the NFL and retired out of the NFL ended up committing suicide. And he was convinced it was because of CTE. So he went back to Harvard and got his doctorate in neuroscience, and now runs this nonprofit that seeks to expose CTE in professional sports, but also he's doing a lot with the military, which is where I've started talking to him. And, what we're finding out in our line of work is that the blast exposures are affecting the center of the brain. So if you think about CTE in athletes, it's your brain bouncing off your skull from impact, right? And if you wear the helmet in NFL and you're using your helmet as a weapon, every time your brain is just rattling around your head. So they're seeing all these spots when they do the pathology on the outer of the brain that they're calling CTE. With us, they're finding those spots in the center of the brain. And what they're thinking is it's the blast waves that are passing through the skull, hitting the ballistic helmet, and then coming back again through the skull. So so every impact you get from a blast wave is actually getting multiple times, because the protection we're using from bullets is actually causing more harm from the blast waves going into the brain.
Wow.
And we're sending guys now for these really high resolution MRIs, and almost all the guys from our world going through there, they're finding spots on the brain, in the center of the brain. So it is a thing.
How does it affect you mentally? Like when those spots are found, like what are some of the symptoms that person experiences?
I don't necessarily know that even if they're finding spots, they might have no symptoms at all. But to me, it's very similar to what guys would find with PTSD, right? You know, the mood change, the not wanting to deal with life or people around them, suicidal ideologies, depression, lack of sleep, all these things that you could be, hey, I'm just depressed. You know, maybe I have PTSD. And I think that's a lot of the same things we're seeing with athletes with CTE is, you know, we're not really figuring out until after the suicide that they actually had clinical problems, not just depression, not just PTE. They had actual problems with their brain. And whether or not we can fix that, I don't know. But at least we can recognize it ahead of time and we can take precautions to try and stop that from happening in the future.
I had another friend that did a few deployments, and he said, in his opinion, I don't want to say his name just because it kind of sounds kind of mean, but he's like, man, a lot of guys came back messed up before they went over there.
I mean, I don't see that in my world.
And I'm not saying, I think what he was trying to say is like, somebody might have gone into the military with issues.
Yeah.
But if you are doing 12 deployments, you've probably not got those issues when you're going in.
I think
like that might be somebody that's getting out before.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously there's different levels of military, right? But I think guys that are getting into the tier 1 levels, their mindset is so much different, and their ability to compartmentalize and manage stress and trauma is far different. And you really don't see the effects of it until from what I've seen, until after their career. So after they get off the train and stop moving and stop living that life at 100 miles an hour, that's when I see people having the problems.
I think, you know, just to give some context into what he was talking about, one thing that he, you know, frustrated him was just like maybe something that like Eddie described as a tourist. Somebody does 1 or 2 deployments and gets out.
Yeah.
You know, and then he might see guys just lean on it as a crutch. Whenever they do get out, and because that was one thing he wrestled with, because he did experience some things over there that affected him physically that he needed to deal with, but he hated the idea of having to, like, you know, blame his experiences on that. And that was kind of the vein in which he said it. It's almost like people using this as an excuse. Well, like, hey, you were going to use anything as an excuse. So I don't want to use that as a blanket statement to anybody that has an issue, because especially 12 deployments, like you're talking about guys that have real issues.
Yeah. And how do you differentiate? That's what's so hard about the PTSD diagnosis, is you really can't tell if someone actually has it or doesn't have it. And you can't tell what level of trauma is causing it, right? You have all these tourists, as he called them, who were never left the base overseas, who have PTSD from nothing more than the potential of incoming artillery rounds to where they're at, and having to go hide in a bunker because the sirens are going off. Never actually been in a firefight or left the base, but they have PTSD. And they very well could have PTSD.
Yeah, I was about to say, maybe they're the type of individuals.
You don't know their ability to handle trauma.
Yeah, maybe they.
But I do know in our guys, and we have guys that commit suicide, and we have guys that have emotional and physiological problems based on stuff that they've seen. But man, they had a really strong ability to compartmentalize and suppress that while they were in and focus on the mission.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the healthy thing to do, but that's the mindset and the culture that we lived in. And that's what we did.
Yeah. I had a buddy talking about having to pull over, like swerving on coming back, see a box on the side of the road.
Yep.
It's just like not even thinking about it till you've passed it, but then realizing like, no, that's just a cardboard box.
Yeah.
That's all that is. I can't imagine it. I have zero judgment towards even the person who never left the base.
Yep.
I really don't, because, and I know some individuals like that haven't, and they went over there. They went
over there. They did. They served.
Didn't.
Yeah, they served.
So I don't have. I'm just curious. my main thing is just the CTE deal, because before he had told me that, I hadn't really ever considered it because I didn't realize the blast could give you that, but it makes sense that it can.
Man, I remember new guys get jobs. I remember being a new guy at Team 2, and we're training on shooting rockets, right? And there's warning labels on these rockets, like don't shoot more than 2 in 24 hours. Because every time you shoot it, it's a concussion. Like the blast to shoot the rocket out of the tube happens right by your head. And so it rings your bell every time. And man, at the end of the day, whatever we didn't shoot, it's like, all right, new guys, go shoot the rest of the rockets because we can't give them back. And so, man, I've shot 10 to 12 of those things when the warning label is don't shoot more than 2 in 24 hours. But so that's just what we did. And even the charges, the charge has a breacher. I dealt with explosives my whole career. And, you're eating charges at fairly close distance. And probably the first half or more of my career, it was never really a concern about the overpressure. It was a concern about, well, if a hinge or a doorknob or a shard of wood were to come off of this door and hit me, that's what I was worried about. We never even really thought about overpressure. We had MSDs, like minimum safe distances, that we had to be from the charge based on how big the charge was. Those have changed.
Yeah.
It's much further than it was when I first got in. And they're like, well, how many of those did I eat? And have these blast waves rolling through my body, not realizing that I'm getting fucked up because we just didn't know any different. And what's going to happen 10 years from now when we start seeing more of these guys with these CTE-like symptoms, and, we start having more guys kill themselves and have these emotional problems, and we're attributing that back to the explosives.
Yeah.
Because at some point we still have to do the job.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And that's why, what Chris is doing and Concussion Legacy is really important for our community, because people are donating their brains to him and they're studying them after the fact. So even guys without symptoms, guys with symptoms, guys that kill themselves, guys that die of natural causes, they have all these people in this now actually doing case studies and testing on brains of guys that, like me, that made a career out of this and want to know what happens when we're actively exposing ourselves to this level of blasts repeatedly.
Yeah. It's wild. Might change some things.
We'll see. I don't know how much can change. Like, in football, you can change a lot. It's a game.
Well,
you can't change anything in war, right?
The thing I was just thinking is maybe the new guys don't go shoot off 10 more rockets at the end of the day. Like simple things like that might help, Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's more different kind of ballistic protection that's out there. I don't know. I don't know what the results are going to be.
Yeah, they got some concussion protocol with the PBR now, but not the PRCA. And I don't know. You can get to a spot in your career where you have a lot less throughout, but it's you can have a lot of concussions in the early days when you're learning.
Yeah.
It's just almost unavoidable in the rough stock events. And then you can have some stints in there where you don't have very many, but they're always, you're going to have them. And yeah, I'm not sure what the limit is.
It's funny. You talked earlier about like what we do and how crazy that. To me, that's crazy. Getting on a bull, that's crazy to me. I don't know why anybody would do that. I have no desire to do that. Well, maybe once, but not for a living. And the perspective from my point of view and the perspective from your point of view, I have a lot of respect for you guys that do it, because to me that I don't understand it.
Yeah. I don't know. I appreciate it. I think you're just trying to be nice, but
first time for everything,
Yeah. No, Eddie, I had to talk Eddie out of it.
Really?
Yeah. Like he was about to get on. His wrist wasn't turning very well, and his shoulder, he like all you guys, like I'm sure because of the jumps, for whatever reason, but he had a really messed up shoulder, and I was like, man, that's a pretty common thing to go wrong in bull riding, because I wasn't going to put him on a bucker. I was going to put him on a dink, something, that would be nice to him, but still, like, shoulders are still something that can. I just did not want him leaving this house with, like I messed
traumatic
up
injury.
Man. Yeah. Did you spend any time around him?
No, we were never. He was always West Coast, so we never crossed paths.
But Rob
and I did deployments together.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. So after he left, after he had his mission and he left and he came to my team and he was on my team. I think I was a 2 IC.
After the
after the big mission.
UBL deal.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So he came and deployed with us, and he fit in. He you know what kind of personality he has, right? He can go anywhere and assimilate,
Yeah.
right? Because he's such a funny dude. Yeah, and we did. It was a later on deployment, but yeah, we had a good one. We had a couple good ops on that one, and then he went and did his thing, and
If you were around Marcus or Mojo, it would have been the early days, huh?
Yeah, it would have been.
But were you?
Which Marcus you talking about?
Luttrell.
Oh no, I was never around. No, I wasn't around them. I'm trying to think. Where did he come from? SDV maybe, but I was. That was. So when I said everybody that went to team 10 out of my buds class, that was that Red Wings deployment.
Gotcha.
And I went to team 2. So I was never deployed with him or ran into him in my career.
Gotcha.
I think I saw his brother a couple times.
Have you been on his podcast?
Nope.
Gotcha.
Nope.
I'll connect you guys.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Dale Brisby connecting seals.
Just
like,
yeah,
hey,
that's what he does. Yeah. It's funny, man. I go through a whole career and people ask me that all the time, but if it's not your your tight group, you'll serve this exact same amount of time, and maybe you're off by one buds class, and you'll never meet that person.
Well, the big divide would be East Coast, West Coast, right?
East Coast, West Coast, but then deployment cycles, right? Because teams are on different deployment cycles. So you figure at least 6 months at a time, or 4 months at the command. Like you're gone, and then they're gone. So that's 8 months out of the year that you're not going to see that person. And really, there's only a small portion of time where maybe you go to a school together, or maybe you're out getting drinks or hanging out at a bar, or your wives know each other, where you maybe run into them, but it doesn't happen.
Now that you're out in the real world, like one thing I love about rodeo is we show up and you get behind the chutes, and to a certain degree, like you can be at a random city, random town across the country, and you're standing next to someone who's entered in the same event. Like there's a certain level of, commonality between you and that. Yeah. And so you can start a conversation on another level that you may not had you run into a stranger at the gas station in that same town. Sure, there's some of that whenever you do run into a seal in the wild.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a quick, if you don't know the person, it's like a feeling out, all right, you're vetting that person, right? Mm. Okay. Yeah. You're really a SEAL. And then it's,
because sometimes people just might say that.
I would say 9 times out of 10, when someone's like, hey, do you know this guy? He's a SEAL. He's not really a SEAL. Yeah. And
you can like think
one question, and I can tell you he's not a SEAL. It happens all the time.
Really?
Yep.
What do they call that? Stolen valor or whatever? Yeah. But what would be the motivation behind somebody to just be that blatant behind the lie?
I just don't think they don't think they're going to get caught.
Okay. Maybe they were in the military?
Sometimes. Some people, like there are people in public office that have been exposed for having that on their resume who were never even in the military.
Really?
Yeah. It's crazy that people think they can get away with. And I bet a lot of people do get away with it.
Yeah.
I remember, where were we? We were somewhere jumping, like a training trip. And it was Arizona because we were all there's a pool out in either Scottsdale. I think it's Scottsdale. That's kind of like a Vegas style rehab on Sundays where everybody goes and drinks by the pool and hangs out. And so we had about 20 SEALs at this pool, and some dumb other comes out with a trident tattoo on his chest. And it's in the pool. And then one of our guys immediately goes up to him and was like, hey, man, what team are you at? And he's like, oh, I was at such a type of team. And immediately he was full. What buds class did you go to? No answer. So within 2 questions, he knows this guy's full. This guy's there with his wife and kids. And, he comes back and tells us. And then all the dudes surround this guy in the pool. And it's like, you need to tell your wife. His wife thought he was a SEAL.
No way.
So he admitted to his wife forcibly in the pool that he was lying about being a SEAL. Wow. And she had no idea. Just because in the middle of Arizona, he ran into 20 SEALs in a hotel pool.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I hope that guy's listening right now and just starts crying or something.
Dadgummit, Dale Brisby. Yeah. You've outed me.
Gotcha.
Because now he's come over to the rodeo world and he's telling everybody he's the greatest bull rider alive, which would be an atrocity.
Yeah, clearly that's you.
Right?
So,
because I have that title. Which I won,
At least once a week I get a call from someone in my network asking if, hey, I've got this guy, is he a SEAL? And most of the time they're not.
Dang.
Yep.
That's wild. It's a lot easier to fake being a bull rider. I'll tell you that.
I mean, it's
not
easy,
that I would know. I'm not saying I would know. I'm just saying there's people out there that do it, and
I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to fake because there's no real system to be able to vet you.
Yeah,
like you can't just Google, is this person a SEAL? In most cases, you'll never know.
Yeah, or they can go get on a dink or two and then just call themselves a bull rider.
That's yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you don't have to go through. There's not a lot of military documentation to back up
none
if somebody's the world's greatest sport. But I am.
Clearly. That's what I'm telling people.
I keep looking at Donnie because that redhead is always doubting me.
Doesn't believe you, huh? Yet he's still here. Come on, man.
Yeah, he's a good videographer. Got to have him.
Yeah, got to keep him.
Well, so how can people contribute to your nonprofit?
First and foremost, go to the website, c1p.org. There's a link, top right corner, big red button, donate. Every little bit helps. If you're someone that has the means and want your local police to get trained, you can fund your entire department and we'll come.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
We have a lot of people will do that in different cities because they worried about their kids and where their kids are going to school, and they'll write a check and pay for their departments to get training.
Really?
Yep.
Dang.
So obviously on the corporate side, anybody wants to sponsor or talk about sponsoring us to help us raise money, or if people have ideas for fundraisers that we can do, and, until we get that federal money coming in, we rely heavily on people donating services and donating money to allow us to do this. So
very interesting.
C1P.org, and then social media, it's community_first_project. And then mine is Sully_C1P. Instagram has links to donate as well. So, yeah. And then,
so do you still do the for-profit trainings?
I try to tie all the training into the nonprofit, and I will do stuff on the for-profit. My for-profit has turned into something completely different. And a lot of it is I would say concierge security services for corporations and high net worth, solving problems and teaching people how to better secure themselves in their everyday life, whether it's online or in the real life. So
gotcha.
That's most of my time is the nonprofit. And to me, it is important to me that this nonprofit is sustainable and growing at a acceptable level that we're going to be national within 10 years. And this becomes a standard that we can affect what that national standard for training in law enforcement is. It needs to change.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Appreciate you.
Like I say, I'm excited. That's why I love the books. I know some people just like, people don't need to write books. Like, I think everybody should write a book. I think every one of y'all should have a podcast. Like, I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
A lot of people do. And
because I wasn't over there, and that's a big deal. Like, that's history. That's a 20-year war that is history in our, like it or love it, argue with why we were over there. I like what Eddie said. Y'all got to remove evil. Yep. And there's always, war's ugly, I'm sure, and collateral damage, I'm sure, but for the most part, some evil dudes got to die by y'all's hands.
Absolutely.
And golly.
And we were just lucky enough to be the people to be in the right place to do it. So.
Yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate your time.
Likewise.
Cook you some dinner and
great.
get you guys settled into the Airbnb. Right. And, where are you going after this?
Back to Fort Worth for a couple of days.
Where do you live full time now?
Virginia Beach still. So
okay.
I retired there. My kids are there, so I'm not leaving anytime soon.
Gotcha.
Yep.
We usually wrap up with some life advice.
All right.
Mine is like, always give 100% unless you're donating blood. What do you got?
That's great. And never stop learning.
Okay.
No matter how old you get, you can always learn. And I treat it every day. I went through a lot of selection courses in my time, but I treated every day I went to work like a selection. If I didn't do my job, someone was going to do it for me.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way now. If I'm not doing my job better than the next guy, then that guy's going to do my job for me. So I'm always trying to learn, and I'm always trying to be better.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's exciting. I like that. And we're on to the next one. You guys check out c1p.org. Check out Sully_C1P on Instagram and contribute.
Please.
Love you guys. Thank you for listening. We're on to the next one. Pow, pow.